The first thing we're going to do today is make a list of different types of worldviews that are possible. I'm not going to pretend that I'm mentioning every single school of philosophy that has ever come along, but I'm going to give you the basic types of worldview. Now, why would I want to do that? Because the title of this seminar is Defending the Christian Worldview Against All Comers. So I better tell you who all those comers are. I'm going to tell you what the primary options are in your philosophy of life. And then we're going to start going through various ways of looking at the world and doing an internal critique of them. So that if you have some of the basic problems and questions down for any of the worldviews that come along, then you are equipped to take on all comers. Okay? So let's survey the field first of all, and then I'm going to get into an internal critique of materialistic atheism and show you that that is perhaps one of the easiest and one of the most preposterous philosophies that's available today. But before that, the map. Spiritual monism says that reality is made up of only one kind of thing. That's why it's called monism. All is one. And the one kind of thing of which everything is. Isn't that a great sentence? The one kind of thing of which everything is spiritual in character, not physical, not material. So that the physical world comes to be something of an illusion. It appears that there's matter, it appears that there's different things out there in the world, that there are distinctions, but in fact all is one, and the one is spiritual. All is mental, or of the nature of idea rather than hard reality. A good example of spiritual monism would be Hinduism. Hinduism says that contrary to appearances, everything is one. There's no distinction between you and me. There's no distinction between us and the grass and the trees. All is one, and the one is God. We are all part of God. So Hinduism is pantheistic. It says all is God, pantheism. And God is not material. It may seem to you that that is real, but it's not. That's an illusion. And because there are no genuine distinctions in reality, what you're doing right now is you're going through life. You're on what's called the wheel of life, like the wheel of fortune. And the consequences are worse. Because if you don't win on the wheel of life, then you got to come back and play again. That's called reincarnation. And if you don't play well and you got bad karma to deal with, when you come back, you're going to come back in a lower form than you are right now. And so that means many of you have a lot to worry about. You might be coming back as aardvarks or ants or even worse, sludge. If you don't live your life right, you're going to go down. And once you live your life right, then you'll start working your way up. And if you do a good job, instead of coming back as an aardvark, you might come back as a Brahma bull. Whoa. But if you do a really good job, you'll eventually stop coming back altogether. And as they say in the poetic form of the Bhagavad Gita, then the single drop will fall into the shoreless ocean of being. And you will no longer be distinct in any way, even in illusion, from anything else. You will belong to the oneness of reality. And then you will stop being reincarnated. You will have reached nirvana. Okay, so that's one way of looking at the world. Hinduism is only the leading illustration of spiritual monism. What you need to get down here in your mind is, as a category, some people say all is one, monist, and in this case, it's a spiritual one. Now, over against monism, we have dualism. which is not the view that disputes should be settled by stepping off and shooting at each other. That is a different kind of duel, D-U-E-L, right? Okay. Dualism means there are two types of reality: mind and matter, or spirit and body. Okay, some things are material in nature, physical, and then there is a kind of reality that isn't physical, that isn't extended in space, but is rather spiritual, mental, or of the nature of idea. And among the dualists, you will find two basic subdivisions. The first is idealism, and the second is Stoicism. The idealist grants that there is a physical world, but says that the physical world is organized and is known by the ideas or types, the concepts that govern the physical world and lie outside the physical world. Okay, what's an idea? Duckness is an idea. Huey, Dewey, and Louie are particular ducks. The idealist, like Plato, said the idea of duckness exists outside of time and space, in another realm, a different kind of reality. But it's the most important kind of reality, it's the highest reality, and that reality in some way controls this reality. And so this world in which we live features many human beings, but none of them are perfect human beings. None of you are the model human being, as much as some women and some men would like to become models in the advertising sense and be the specimen of humanity. Everybody's got imperfections. And if they aren't imperfections of a physical sort, they're imperfections of a psychological or personality or mental or some other sort. No one is the perfect specimen of your humanity. Just like there's no perfect triangle. If I were teaching you geometry and putting a triangle up on the board, there would be something wrong with the triangle. No matter how perfect I tried to make it, one of the lines would not be completely straight, one of the angles would not be exactly what it's supposed to be. So you understand that? And yet we all know what a triangle is. We all know what a human being is. We all have the idea. It's just we never find the idea perfectly instantiated or illustrated in the here and now on this earth. So the idealist says the ideal triangle is outside of this world. The ideal of humanity is outside this world. The ideal of love is outside of this world. In this world, all we have at best are approximations. And so how do we know about these ideas or ideals? The idealist ends up saying something like, we intuit them. We intuit them, or we come into this world with them as a priori, previous to experience, forms or ways of thinking. Or in this world, when we encounter a chair, we intuit chairness, the concept of chair, and we apply that to all sorts of different kinds of chairs besides the one that we first learned as a chair. There is an idea that we intuit or come into this world with that is not part of time and space. Now that's true, isn't it? Anybody ever seen duckness? Anyone ever killed duckness? Tried to serve it for dinner? Can't do it, can you? Because you can't kill an idea. You can't swallow it. It won't nourish you, except mentally, I guess. Okay, so ideas exist outside this world. But the dualist says there's a spiritual reality, mind, that knows, intuits the ideas, and a physical reality, body, that encounters the ducks, the particular ducks and particular triangles and particular human beings of the world. Stoicism is another form of dualism. The Stoics also believed that there was a kind of physical reality and a mental or spiritual reality. The Stoic, however, tended to be moralistic. He said, in this world, you can't help the circumstances of your life. And so instead of fighting against those circumstances, you ought to go with the flow. Whatever is happening to you in this world, accept, be a stalwart about it, stiff upper lip, and go on with your life. As long as you struggle against the flow of life and what is coming to you in this world, then you're going to be unhappy and frustrated. So here's the advice a Stoic would give. Let's say you're on one of our Southern California freeways and you have a concert you want to get to. Concert starts at 7:30. You're late leaving work at 6:15. You got to get home and pick up your friends. Maybe you want to change and get over to the concert before it starts, but you've got bumper-to-bumper traffic. Now, what do most people do when they run into that kind of a problem? They get really frustrated. Hit that horn, change lanes, swear at the guy who cuts you off, whatever. You know, and so you fight. Well, in Southern California, we sometimes draw guns and try to settle it too, but that's not what a Stoic would tell you. A Stoic would say, hey, chill out. Fall back. Go with the flow, which isn't very fast on the freeway right now, but the point is, life has dished out to you something that's contrary to your desires, then adjust your desires. And if you adjust your desires, so in this case, give up your desire to get to the concert on time, if you give that up, then you have no problem, right? You know, just bear up with the problems of life. Be a good soldier about it. That's what the Stoics made, very good soldiers. Marcus Aurelius, the Roman emperor, loved Stoicism because if his troops studied Stoicism, then they became very obedient and submissive. Instead of, thinking there was something like rights that were being violated or complaining that they didn't have a very easy life, they would just have to take what was dished out to them. Stoic mentality says there is a reason or a law that flows through the physical world, and you need to get on that wave, ride it completely to shore. Just go with the flow. So the idealist says reason, idea, ideal, form is outside of this world. The Stoic says reason flows through the things of this world, but in both cases you have dualism. There's a physical reality and there's a rational or an ideal or a mental reality as well. A third kind of worldview is materialistic atomism. I want you to notice the connection between these categories. They're easier to remember that way. The first one was monistic. There's only one kind of reality, and in this case, spiritual. The next is dualistic. There's two kinds of reality. The third is atomistic, that says there's an infinite number of bits of reality, but they're made of matter. It's not spiritual, it's material. So reality is made up of physical stuff, and that physical stuff is broken down into smaller and smaller particles or bits of matter. Now, of the three views that are up on the board and what you've heard thus far, which view comes closest to the common outlook of our culture? Yes, materialistic atomism is what is the prevailing view in the sciences and the university and what most people take for granted. That is, until you start pressing them about the implications of materialistic atomism. Let's just be real quick about this. One of the implications is if everything's made out of bits of matter and that's all the reality there is, then what is love? Well, if it's anything, love is just a way of describing some kind of material process. And some people have been willing to say that. They've been willing to say sexual desire is romanticized as love. But basically what's going on in the hormones and this interaction between the sexes we call love. But of course that doesn't account for a parent's love for his or her children or the sacrifice of one friend for another that has nothing to do with sexual desire and so forth. But there are some people who try to reduce love to material interaction of some sort, but very few people would do that. What usually happens is if you press a materialist about what love is, he or she will say, well, there isn't anything really called love. or they'll back off their materialism, and this is really kind of, I don't want to say middle America in the way that we break up the geography of our nation. This is really kind of the middle way for most Americans. They back off their materialistic atomism, and they want at that point to become a little bit dualistic. They want to believe there are ideals. Yes, Virginia, there is a Santa Claus. There is something to this idea of giving to others and being sacrificial and loving, but who knows what that is, you know. Okay, so materialistic atomism is unlike dualism in that it says, no, ultimately there are no ideals, there is no mind, there's brain tissue, but there's no mind, there are no immaterial laws, and so forth. Okay, of the materialistic atomists, I'm going to give you two basic breakdowns. First of all, there are those who hold that there is no freedom in this world. Everything is determined in advance, and so this is called determinism. The determinist holds that every event that takes place is theoretically predictable if you knew all the antecedent causes for it. If you knew all the causes, you could tell what was going to happen. For instance, if you're a determinist, to take today as an illustration, if you would have had a big enough computer that could take into account all of the causes, all of the things that would happen in your brain tissue up here, all the words that would come out of my mouth and so forth, if you could take every one of those factors and put it into a computer, we could have predicted your behavior in realigning in your seating. Theoretically, it's predictable. Because there is no freedom, there is no randomness in this universe. Everything takes place because of antecedent causes. And there are two crucial forms of determinism around in our world today that you're going to run into, one more than the other now. But the first is behaviorism, the psychological doctrine that says human beings act as they are conditioned to act. The behaviorist says all human behavior is the theoretically predictable outcome of antecedent conditioning, so that you are, as it were, advanced white rats. You are conditioned in one way in your home and by your society, and given that conditioning, your behavior is theoretically predictable. You may think you have free will, you may think you make choices, but all of that is nothing more but the complicated outcome of factors that, if known, would have enabled us to tell you what you were going to do. That's behaviorism. The other form of determinism that you'll run into in the university is Marxism. Marxism is somewhat different than behaviorism in that it focuses not so much upon human psychology and what makes individuals do what they do because of previous stimuli and conditioning, but the Marxist says there are certain historical forces, and in particular economic forces, the means of production that is used in a particular society, that determine the outcome of that society as a whole. So Marxist is a more aggregate determinist, whereas the behaviorist is more individualistic and thus focuses on psychology rather than economics and social forms. So, spiritual monism, two forms of dualism, and there are two forms of materialistic atomism. You have the deterministic form, which we've seen where? In behaviorism and Marxism, but you also have materialistic atomists that believe in free will. And I'm going to overgeneralize, I might get in trouble for this. So I'm just going to put them all in the category of what I'll call hedonism. Those who have a hedonistic form of determinism believe that, a hedonistic form of free will, believe that we live for one thing or another. And then, of course, they argue among themselves what it is we should live for. The egoist, not egotist, there are plenty of those in the university too, but the egoist says that you should exercise your free will for your own benefit, whatever will get you ahead. My ethics professor at USC, John Hospers, is one of the best known theoreticians of egoism alive today. And his political philosophy is known as libertarianism. Everybody should be free to do what is in their best interest. So use your free will to advance your own cause. Now, that doesn't always mean that you do selfish things. If you're an intelligent egoist, you know that it would be in your best interest to help people, at least from time to time. Why would that be? It's in your long-term interest to stop and help somebody who needs his tire changed, because someday you may need someone to help you. So you're not doing it because you love this person. You're doing it because it's the most rational policy for living in a world that is favorable to you and to your interest. Those who are not egoistic hedonists are utilitarian. The utilitarian says you should do what is in the best interest of the most people. The greatest happiness for the greatest number is what should govern your free will. You should do what will be conducive to the good of everybody as much as you possibly can. And the best example of utilitarianism that we see in our culture today is socialism. Socialism says the reason the state should govern the means of production and there should be no private property is that therefore everybody's interests will be taken into account rather than the selfish interest of the egoist. But not all utilitarians are socialists. Some utilitarians are welfare, statist, and we have a number of different versions of it. And then finally, under the category of hedonism or the free will understanding of materialistic atomism, we should put down existentialism. Existentialism stresses the freedom of man so much that according to the existentialist, nothing governs what you will be. You come into this world as an existent, and as you develop, you make choices as to what you will be. Nothing determines your essence from outside. God doesn't determine what you will be. The state doesn't determine what you will be. Your social conditioning doesn't determine what you will be. Your biology doesn't determine what you will be. You will freely choose what you will be. You are not, you don't do what you do because of the school teacher. You don't do what you do because of the priest or the pastor. You don't do what you do because of your parents. You do what you do because you choose it. The existentialist has a radical doctrine of freedom. You first exist and then you choose your essence. You will be whatever you choose to be. There's only one more that we need to put up on the board. I know that'll make you happy. The thing that distinguishes these three basic entries on the board is the nature of reality. Is it one and spiritual? Is it two, mind and body? Or is it one again, made up of many bits, but now materialistic? So you have matter, or spirit, matter or spirit, many things, one thing, many bits of the one kind of thing, or one kind of thing, or do you have two kinds of things? Now this is a lot, in a half hour, it's a lot for you to take in. But when you stop and think about it, if you get that grid set up in your mind, just about anything you encounter is going to fall into one of these categories. Whether they use this vocabulary or not, what other options are there? Reality is one or it's many. Reality is mind or it's body. Okay? Well, I'm going to put one last option up there that is distinguished from these three basic ones, not on the basis of the kind of reality that there is, but on the basis of whether you can know anything for sure about ultimate reality. The fourth basic school of philosophy that you need to be familiar with, I'm going to call pragmatism or skepticism. The pragmatist and the skeptic is the philosopher who stands over there and watches all these other schools of thought argue and says, who cares? Quite literally, the pragmatists like John Dewey at the beginning of the 20th century, the school of pragmatism said all these old philosophical problems are worthless. There's no cash value to them. The only thing that really makes a difference is whether you are successful in this world in solving your problems. To be pragmatic, therefore, means to forget the theoretical issues and just get on to solving things. And so Dewey says, it makes no difference whether I know the nature of reality. If I'm adjusting to my environment successfully, if I'm advancing the species, if evolution is moving ahead through our efforts, if we are successful, then that is truth. Truth is no longer correspondence to the world, the nature of reality. Truth is what works. We have an old joke. Let me take a second here. Well, it's not a real funny one, so don't get your hopes up. We have kind of a humorous way of describing different approaches to philosophy. And it begins with an elephant that's on a barge just a little bit off, the shore. And the question is, how do we get the elephant from the barge to the shore? Now, the continental philosopher, the European philosopher, would start out by saying, yes, but is the elephant real? And move on from there. The British philosopher, being more empirical and scientific in orientation, would begin with the question, how much does the elephant weigh? The American philosopher, being a pragmatist, would say, how much will you pay me? And that may be a little overdone and a little unfair, but it gets to the heart of the matter of pragmatism. Pragmatism says, I don't care if it's real, and I really don't care what it weighs. Where the rubber hits the road, what will you pay me? Will it work? Now, a version of pragmatism that doesn't go so far as to say truth is what works is skepticism. The skeptic says, nobody knows for sure. And often he turns very cynical. He says, since nobody knows for sure, we don't know what ultimate values are, we don't know the nature of reality, the only thing that really counts is getting by in society. Not in the pragmatic sense, but in the more selfish and self-serving sense. The skeptics often became debate coaches in ancient Greece, or what we would today call lawyers. It's true. Lawyers are one of the scummiest, breeds of humanity that you can find today from a moral standpoint. Now, you better be able to recognize a generalization for what it is. That's a generalization. There's some very godly men that are lawyers too, and I praise the Lord for them. But as a generalization, you know what a lawyer does? A lawyer takes money to argue for a particular position. And he doesn't, the vast majority of them do not say, I will decide whether the position is right and moral and just, and then be willing to have you pay me for defending it. He chooses which position he will argue on the basis of who his client is and who's paying his salary. And that goes all the way back to ancient Greece. The sophists were a breed of skeptical philosophers who said, there is no absolute truth, nobody can know for sure, so let us teach you how to get your way in the assembly by debating well. Okay? So this fourth category of philosophy is basically a giving up of the big questions of philosophy and just trying to pay attention to what works, or just being willing to say no one knows. We were cynical about this. No one can know for sure. You can't know anything. I can't know anything. We'll just leave it at that. I know this is oversimple. If I had you in my philosophy class, I would expect you to do more than this, but this will get you by. It is accurate enough for your purposes. Every point of view that you come across, no matter who your roommate is, no matter what department you're studying in or who your professor is, will have got to have come to one of these positions or some variety thereof. They're either going to be a monist and think everything is spiritual. They're going to be a dualist of the idealist or the Stoic sort. They're going to be an atomistic materialist, thinking there is no free will or there is free will, or they're going to say it makes no difference, it only matters whether we are successful in solving our problems, or even worse, cynically, no one can know anything for sure. When you come up against a professor or a roommate that has a different religion than your own, the temptation will be for you to think, oh yeah, but what Dr. Bahnsen taught us was for all these unbelieving philosophers. And that's wrong. That's a shallow view of what you've got here. You have to understand that these other religions, they aren't true. They aren't based on the revelation of the one and only living and true God. They too are a kind of philosophy. And if you treat them for the philosophy they are, the method of refutation that I give you now will be just as effective with them as it is with anything else. What I'd like to do now, I'm going to change the map slightly. Keep this in mind. But I'm going to start going through different options. And here are the three options. I'm going to first refute atheistic materialism. I'm then going to refute Platonic dualism. And then I'm going to refute religious philosophies, religious worldviews. All right, just so you know where we are going. And then you can fit the refutations into this other outline that I've been giving you. It should be obvious that the religious philosophies are going to be in these two categories. I'm going to take a secular version of dualism, the best one we've seen in history, Plato's, because it doesn't do you any good to go for the easy, just the slow guys at the back of the pack. I'm going to take the leader here and try to deal with him. And then I'm beginning with materialism, or the atheistic views that you see here on the bottom of the chart. So we will cover all the different kinds, but I'm just going to simplify it into three sections of refutation. A little bit of review, and then atheism will fall. What does everybody do when they do philosophy? They have to come to reliable presuppositions that undergird everything else in their study, and they must be able to unify the world into a worldview where every part of man's experience has its appropriate place and everything is interpreted. Now, can materialistic atheists do just that? In order for you to refute a philosophy, there are a lot of different things you can do, but two things should be on your mind. You want this in your notes no matter what. You want to look at the worldview of your opponent and identify arbitrariness, or secondly, inconsistency. Arbitrariness or inconsistency. Arbitrariness is not allowed in a philosophical outlook, because then you see it's not rational, it's just a matter of however you happen to feel that day. Arbitrariness gives you no reason for believing that you have found the truth. I mean, it may be that you had indigestion this morning and you felt like this is what the nature of reality was. Or, you have people that are pulled from one view to another and they can't all be true. Arbitrariness is not allowed in the philosophical worldview. And I don't know how many times I can say that, wake you up at 4 p.m, get you to figure this out, because over and over and over again, when I have people who come to me for help in apologetics, and I'm very happy to have them come. That's my calling in life. I love doing that. But over and over and over again, they'll say, well, but my roommate says, or my professor says, and I say, okay, and why do they say that? Oh, they don't know. They just think that's what it's like. I say, okay, so they haven't got any argument for their position, do they? No. I said, why didn't you say that to them? Oh. We get bamboozled by the fact that the professor has some fancy vocabulary or says, well, my view is the following. To which you should say, big deal. I mean, say it respectfully. I agree with what Dr. North taught you. You don't have to be a red hot in class and so forth, but you've got to get to the place where to the professor or the roommate or the friend that you're witnessing to, that when they throw some point of view out, you can say, yes, and why do you believe that? Do you have any reason to think that? Have you experienced? What if somebody says, I think that all human behavior is determined by social conditioning. You say, yeah, and why do you believe that? Well, my teacher said that. You say, well, I mean, that's the blind faith of which you think Christians are guilty all the time. You believe it because your teacher said it? You got to do better than that. Well, I believe it because I've seen it. Okay? The premise is that all human behavior is governed by antecedent social forces. And you're going to say, you've seen all human behavior? You've seen all social forces? And you've seen the causal connection between the two? Well, no, I haven't really seen that. So you've seen a few human actions which you think you can make a sketchy rundown of how social forces cause them. Right. You say, well, then you've got a logical problem. You're going from very slim evidence to a very broad conclusion. Your evidence will not support your conclusion. It collapses. You mustn't let the unbeliever get away with arbitrariness. He or she must have some reason for believing what they do. When they say, this is the nature of reality, this is the way we should live our lives, you should say, and how do you know that? How do you know that? And children get in trouble with their parents, by asking why over and over again. So be careful in terms of your social interaction. But that, in essence, is what you're doing. You're saying, well, why? Why do you believe that? And why do you believe that? And why do you believe that? How is that so? How do you know? How do you know? How do you know? Keep pushing, because no one's allowed to be arbitrary. Secondly, no one is allowed to be inconsistent. No one is allowed to contradict himself or herself when they put together a philosophy. Why aren't people allowed to be inconsistent? I could give you a number of reasons, but maybe this is the quickest way to point it out. If you are inconsistent, you can prove anything from inconsistent premises. Any logician, any trained logician would be able to tell you that. And if you can prove anything according to a certain set of premises, then you're being arbitrary. So we're right back to problem number one, right? Here's how you can prove anything from a contradiction. Those of you who have had logic, follow closely. My first premise, I assert, is P. My second premise that I assert is not P. Now, of course, very few people are going to come out and just give the contradiction to you on a platter like that. P, not P. And then you go, whoa, wait. It's going to be buried, there may be 100 premises in there. But as you go through them, you discern, now wait a minute, this one doesn't fit in with this one. There's a contradiction. So boil it down, P and not P. Now, if I were to be granted P and not P, P being the premise affirming something, not P being the denial of that affirmation. By the laws of logic, my next step would be to say P or Q. Okay, this by the law of addition. Whenever one premise is true, you can add any other premise to it with the word or, and the complex premise is also true. Okay, what is today? Tuesday? Okay, if I say today is Tuesday, and you say, okay, that's true, then I can say, then today is Tuesday or the moon is made out of green cheese. Now take the whole thing. Today is Tuesday or the moon is made out of green cheese. Is that true? Yes, it is true, because it is Tuesday, and therefore Well, that is a minor factual error. Today is Wednesday, or the moon is made out of green cheese. Is that complex proposition true? Yes, it is, because the one part, the first part before or, is true. Therefore, whenever I have a true proposition, P, I can add anything I want to it. But now there's another thing. In fact, now I can conclude that Q is true. See, I did that in just 2 steps. Do you know how I did it? Those of you who've had logic know that is disjunctive syllogism, isn't it? I have P or Q. One of them must be true. If I can deny one of them, then the other one has got to be the truth. Now, since I have P or Q, and look right above that, in this premise I have not P, that means I cancel out the P and Q is left. The amazing thing is I started with only P and not P, and I ended up proving Q. Now, this, you may seem like, it's just little mind games. It's not. This is very crucial. What it tells you is that when there's an inconsistency in a person's philosophy, that philosophy is capable of concluding anything. And that philosophy is therefore arbitrary.